Snow swept through Chicago's south side like ash shaken from a dying fire. The world was still, except for the hollow sound of wind scraping through alleys and the distant hum of freight trains crossing steel bridges. Robert Sterling sat in the back of his luxury sedan, the blue glow of his phone illuminating his weathered face. 55 years had etched lines around his eyes that deepened when he frowned at quarterly reports. The heater hummed softly as his driver navigated streets increasingly buried under February's latest assault. Skyscrapers loomed in the distance, their lights blurred by falling snow, like stars viewed through frosted glass. "Sir, main road's blocked by an accident. Need to detour through Oakwood." The driver's voice cut through Robert's concentration. Robert nodded absently, his mind still swimming with profit margins and shareholder expectations. Sterling Industries had just closed its most profitable quarter. The automation initiative he'd championed had exceeded projections. The board was pleased, yet something hollow lingered in his chest, a void that widened with each success. The car turned down a narrow street lined with abandoned buildings and scattered streetlights that cast sickly yellow pools on dirty snow. "Keep moving, Frank. It's not safe down this street," Robert said, glancing up from his phone. "Yes, sir. Just a few blocks until we can get back on Lake Shore." But Frank didn't move. The car had stopped. "What's wrong?" Robert asked, irritation edging his voice. "Sir, look." Frank pointed through the windshield. Under the pale streetlight, Robert saw a cardboard box trembling in the wind. A tiny hand reached out, then withdrew quickly. "Just some homeless person. Let's keep moving," Robert said, but his eyes remained fixed on the box. The world outside was 15 degrees and falling. The hand emerged again. Small. Too small. "Wait." The word escaped Robert's mouth before he recognized his own voice. He wasn't sure why he'd stopped. Maybe instinct, maybe guilt. Or maybe it was because the box moved again, like something inside it was trying to stay alive. "Sir, we really shouldn't—" "Wait here," Robert commanded, his decision made. He stepped out of the car, the leather soles of his Italian shoes sinking into slush. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing his breath. Snow caught in his silver hair as he approached the box, the headlights of his sedan spilling golden light across the scene. Inside the cardboard shelter, a small girl sat curled up, wrapped in a thin jacket that barely reached her knees. Her hair, blonde and tangled, clung to her pale face. Her lips moved, whispering words so faint they almost disappeared in the wind. Robert leaned down, straining to hear. The words were soft, almost prayer-like. He didn't understand their meaning, but he understood their tone, the ache of a child calling out for someone who would never answer. "Hey," he said quietly, crouching down, his breath turning white in the freezing air. "It's okay. You're safe." "No," the girl flinched, pressing against the wall of the box. Her eyes, large, blue, and shining, watched him carefully. "Don't be scared," he murmured. "I'm not here to hurt you." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then in a small, steady voice, she whispered, "Mama said don't talk to men at night." Robert's chest tightened. "Your mama sounds smart," he said gently, "but she'd want you to be warm, wouldn't she?" The girl hesitated, her lips cracked, her hands trembling. Next to her lay a folded piece of paper, edges soft from being handled too long. It was a birthday card, purple crayon letters spelling "Happy Birthday, Mama." Snow was gathering on her knees. Robert shrugged off his wool coat, navy blue and heavy, still carrying the faint scent of cedar from his penthouse closet, and draped it around her shoulders. She froze, eyes wide, then slowly pulled the coat tighter. "What's your name?" he asked. "Sophie," she whispered. "Sophie Wilson." He nodded. "I'm Robert." She studied his face, curious but cautious. "You rich?" He blinked, caught off guard. "I suppose I am. Does that make me bad?" Sophie shook her head. "No, just different." Her honesty cut through the night sharper than the cold. Robert smiled, though it felt strange on his face, like using a muscle he'd forgotten he had. He looked down at her shoes. They were thin sneakers, soaked through, the fabric stiff with ice. "Sophie, do you have anywhere to go?" "Here," she said simply. "This is my house. It keeps the snow out." The wind howled down the alley, rattling trash bins. The box shuddered again. Robert crouched lower, his knees aching. "It's not enough to keep you warm." "Mama said I'm brave," Sophie replied. Her voice was flat, but her eyes glowed with a strange, quiet pride. Robert said nothing. For years, his life had been meetings, mergers, and boardrooms. Rooms full of heat, but no warmth. He hadn't thought about bravery in decades. He turned toward his car, headlights still cutting through the snow. The warmth of the heater shimmered in the frosty air. He looked back at the small figure inside the box. "Wait here," he said. A few moments later, he returned carrying a paper bag from the car. Inside was a leftover dessert, a half slice of chocolate cake from his dinner meeting. When he placed it in front of her, Sophie's eyes widened. "It's for you," he said softly. She stared at the cake for a long time. Then, with careful precision, she used the plastic fork to cut the slice in half. One half, she placed it beside the birthday card for Mama, she said. "She likes chocolate." Robert's throat tightened. He watched her lift the fork and take a tiny bite. She chewed slowly, savoring it, her eyelids fluttering like she was tasting happiness itself. "When's your birthday, Sophie?" he asked. "Don't know," she said, licking a bit of frosting from her finger. "Mama said every day we wake up as one." Her words struck him deeply. He found himself glancing toward the sky. Snowflakes drifted lazily, silent and endless. "How old are you?" "6, she said, holding up her fingers. "Mama said 6 is old enough to wait." "Wait for what?" She looked down at the card. "For her to come back." Robert said nothing. The only sound was the soft hum of his idling car. The cold crept through his suit, but something else, something unfamiliar, was burning behind his ribs. He took off his leather gloves and handed them to her. "Here," he said, "these might help." She slipped them on, her fingers vanishing inside. "They're too big," she murmured. "You'll grow into them," he said. She smiled faintly. "Mama said that too." The street lamp flickered, casting shadows that stretched across the snow. For a moment, the alley felt suspended between two worlds, one of luxury, one of survival, and somehow they were both standing in the middle. "Sophie," he said finally, "would you come with me somewhere warm for tonight?" Her shoulders stiffened. "The police take kids away. I don't want to disappear." "No police," Robert promised quickly. "Just a church, people I trust, they'll keep you safe." Sophie looked at him for a long time, her eyes searching for a lie. Then slowly she nodded. "Only if Mama can come." Robert glanced at the card and said softly, "She already is." He reached for her gently, lifting her out of the box. She was lighter than he expected. Her head fell against his chest. He could feel the faint, uneven rhythm of her breath. "Your car is warm," she murmured. "It's waiting for us," he replied as he carried her toward the sedan. Snow spiraled around them like pale feathers. He opened the door, helped her into the back seat, and turned up the heat. Sophie blinked sleepily, still wrapped in his oversized coat. "You smell like wood," she said. "That's cedar," he replied, "from home." "I's home?" she asked. He stared through the windshield, his voice low. "I'm not sure anymore." By the time the car pulled away from the alley, Sophie had fallen asleep, her small hands clutching the edge of his coat. Robert looked into the mirror. The cardboard box was already half buried under the falling snow, fading into the white silence. He gripped the steering wheel tighter, heart pounding with something that felt like guilt. And maybe, for the first time in years, grace. The car's heater hummed softly as Robert drove through the sleeping city. Chicago's skyline shimmered behind the curtain of snow, towers like frozen sentinels watching over the quiet streets. Inside the car, the warmth smelled faintly of leather and cedar. Sophie was asleep in the back seat, her cheek pressed against the window, his coat wrapped around her like a cocoon. Every few minutes she stirred, murmuring fragments of dreams, snippets of songs, whispers of her mother. Each sound hit him like a pulse. He didn't know where to go. Home was the penthouse in Lincoln Park, 28 floors above the world, full of glass and silence. It didn't seem right to bring her there. The only other place that came to mind was the church he sometimes passed on his morning commute, the one with the flickering cross and the sign that read St. Luke's Community Shelter. He had never gone inside, but he remembered the face of the woman who ran it, dark-skinned, white-haired, eyes that saw too much. He made a turn, tires hissing over wet asphalt. The streets grew narrower, quieter. The car's headlights swept across closed storefronts and empty bus stops until the church appeared. its steeple rising out of the snow like an old guardian. The sign out front glowed dimly. Hot meals. All welcome. Robert parked by the curb and stepped out into the biting wind. The snow had stopped, leaving a sharp metallic chill in the air. He opened the back door carefully. "Sophie," he said softly. She stirred, blinking. "We're here." She looked out the window, disoriented. "Where's Mama?" "Inside," he said gently, though his voice faltered. "Let's get you warm first." He lifted her again, feeling the frail weight of her body, and carried her up the steps. The church door creaked open to the scent of old wood and simmering soup. The hall inside glowed with a faint golden light from rows of lamps. A few people slept on cots near the walls, covered in patchwork blankets. The quiet hum of a radio drifted from somewhere near the kitchen. A woman appeared in the doorway, a tall figure wrapped in a shawl, silver braids gleaming under the light. "Evening," she said, her tone cautious but kind. "You bringing someone in?" "Yes," Robert said, lowering Sophie to her feet. She was outside, cold, alone. The woman knelt, her smile softening. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Sophie," the girl whispered. "Sophie Wilson." "Well, Sophie," the woman said, "you're safe now. My name's Reverend Catherine Mitchell. You can call me Miss Catherine." Sophie nodded, glancing up at Robert for reassurance. Catherine stood and turned to him. "We've got warm blankets and some soup left. She'll need both." Robert hesitated, not wanting to leave yet. "Can I stay for a while?" Catherine studied him, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You one of those who drop a bill and disappear, or one who listens before he speaks?" "I don't know what I am," he admitted. She smiled faintly. "Then tonight's a good night to find out." Catherine led Sophie toward the kitchen. Robert followed, awkwardly aware of how out of place he looked in his tailored suit. The room was small but warm, the air rich with the smell of chicken broth and coffee. Sophie sat at the table while Catherine ladled soup into a chipped white bowl. "Eat slow," Catherine said, sliding it in front of her. "Too fast and your stomach will argue." Sophie nodded and took the spoon, her hands trembling from cold. Robert stood in the doorway, unsure what to do with his hands. Catherine poured coffee into a mug and handed it to him. "You look like you need this." "Thank you." The first sip burned his tongue, but the heat grounded him. For a moment, the only sounds were the clink of Sophie's spoon and the low whistle of the radiator. Catherine leaned against the counter, watching him. "You don't seem like a man who wanders alleys in the middle of the night." "I don't," Robert said. "Not usually." "Then why tonight?" He looked at Sophie. "Because she was there." Catherine nodded slowly. "Sometimes God doesn't send angels in white, mister." "Sterling," he said quietly. "Robert Sterling." Her brows rose. "Sterling Industries." "Yes, I read about you in the paper. Automation layoffs, something about efficiency." "People lost jobs," she added. Her words were even, but they landed heavy. Robert looked down. "I thought it would help the company." "Help who?" she asked softly. He didn't answer. Sophie had stopped eating, eyes flicking between them. Catherine gave her a gentle smile. "You finish that soup, baby. Then we'll find you a blanket." Sophie obeyed. When she was done, Catherine led her to a row of cots near the far wall. She tucked her in with practiced hands, humming something low and comforting. Sophie clutched the folded birthday card against her chest and whispered, "Mama, I'm warm now." Catherine turned back to Robert. "You did right bringing her here," she said. "She's been on the streets a few weeks. Neighbors say her mama passed at the hospital after losing her job. Couldn't afford treatment." Robert felt the blood drain from his face. "Her mother worked for us," he said, voice barely audible. "Warehouse division. I signed the order that cut her position." Catherine's gaze softened, though her tone remained steady. "Then maybe this is your second chance." "Second chance at what?" "At being human again." Her words struck deep, quiet but undeniable. He turned away, staring out the window at the snow beginning again, soft flakes drifting past the street lamp. "I didn't know," he whispered. "You know now," she replied. "That's what matters." Sophie shifted in her sleep, the blanket rising and falling with each breath. Robert watched her for a long time, something tightening in his chest, an ache that felt dangerously close to hope. "What happens to her now?" he asked. "We'll keep her safe," Catherine said. City programs are slow, but we'll find her a place. Maybe foster care. Robert flinched. She's afraid of being taken. Catherine nodded. Most kids like her are. The system's complicated, but we'll do what we can. He hesitated, then said, "Could I visit, just to check in?" "You can," Catherine said, "but be careful. Don't make promises you can't keep. These children remember who leaves." He nodded, guilt pressing against his ribs. "I'll remember that." Catherine smiled faintly. "Good. Coffee's free if you wash your cup." Robert almost laughed, the sound surprising him. He washed the mug under the tap, the water warm against his cold hands. When he turned, Catherine was watching him with something like approval. "You're welcome here, Mr. Sterling," she said. "Even billionaires need shelter sometimes." Outside, the wind had softened to a whisper. He stood by the door, looking back one last time at Sophie, asleep beneath the blanket. The coat he'd given her lay folded neatly beside her cot. In her hand, she still held the card. "Happy birthday, Mama." He stepped into the cold, the door closing softly behind him. The street was quiet. Snow covered his car like a white shroud. He brushed it off and climbed inside, sitting in silence as the heater hummed to life. Across the street, the church glowed faintly through the falling snow. Warm, alive, human. He realized he hadn't seen anything that beautiful in years. As he drove away, the world outside blurred into light and shadow. The image of the little girl in his coat stayed with him, etched into his mind like a wound that refused to close. For the first time since he could remember, Robert Sterling didn't feel powerful. He felt small, uncertain, and utterly awake. The morning sun rose pale and slow over Chicago, spreading thin streaks of gold across the rooftops. The city was already awake, the sound of delivery trucks echoing through the narrow streets, the smell of coffee drifting from corner cafes. But in Robert Sterling's penthouse high above Lincoln Park, silence reigned. He stood by the window, coffee untouched, watching the traffic crawl below. His reflection hovered faintly on the glass, a man in a crisp white shirt, eyes ringed with fatigue. The warmth of the shelter still clung to him like smoke. He could hear Sophie's small voice repeating in his mind, "Mama said every day we wake up is a birthday." He set the coffee down, the cup clinking against marble. Across the room, his assistant's messages flashed on the tablet. Quarterly report meeting at 9. Press follow-up on automation project. Investor call at noon. He swiped them away. None of it seemed real anymore. The luxury around him, the leather couch, the skyline view, the glass trophies, felt like props in a life he'd accidentally wandered into. He grabbed his coat from the chair. The faint scent of cedar and smoke mixed in the fabric, the same coat that had wrapped around a shivering child. When he pressed it to his face, he could still smell the faint sweetness of chocolate frosting. His phone buzzed. It was a call from Edward Vance. Robert ignored it. Another call came, then a message. "Need to discuss PR fallout from last week's layoffs. Call me as soon as possible." He tossed the phone aside and walked toward his desk. Something was tugging at him, sharp and restless. He opened his laptop, typed into the company database, "Wilson, Jennifer." The system blinked before returning a result. "Jennifer Wilson, Warehouse Operations, West Haven District. Termination October 4th. Cause, redundancy due to automation restructuring." Attached to the file was a note from HR. "Employee health declining, requested medical leave, denied pending review." Robert's throat went dry. He clicked on the attached image. An ID badge photo of a woman in her 30s, hair tied back, smile faint but warm. Beneath her eyes lingered exhaustion and a hint of the same spark he'd seen in Sophie. He leaned back in his chair, the weight of the realization pressing on him. The decision that had ended her job had been his signature, just another approval in a digital stack of names and numbers. He remembered the meeting vividly now, the boardroom heavy with talk of efficiency and profit margins. Vance saying, "You saved 10% this quarter, we hit record bonuses." He had nodded then. Efficiency, growth, progress. Now, looking at Jennifer's face, the words felt poisoned. He scrolled down to her final HR note. Hospital admission 2 weeks after termination. Nothing after that. No forwarding address, no emergency contact, no family listed except one dependent. Sophie Wilson, age 6. Robert closed the laptop slowly, his chest aching as if something heavy had been nailed inside it. He turned toward the window again. The city outside looked different now, sharper, colder. The people below, crossing streets and catching buses, were no longer faceless. He imagined Jennifer among them once, walking to the warehouse before dawn, lunch packed, hope still alive. And then the day it all vanished. The thought made his hands tremble. His phone rang again. Vance, this time Robert answered. "You missed our meeting," Vance said, voice brisk. "You planning to skip the investor call too?" "I had something more important." "More important than a $30 million rollout?" "A little girl sleeping in a box," Robert said flatly. Silence hummed on the line. Then Vance chuckled, low and cold. "Don't tell me you're feeling sentimental." "You can't save everyone, Robert. That's not how this works." "Maybe it should be." "Careful," Vance warned. "You sound like a man about to throw away everything he built." Robert stared at the skyline. "Maybe everything I built needs throwing away." He hung up before Vance could answer. For a long moment, he sat in the stillness. The hum of the heating vents filled the room, a soft mechanical sigh. It reminded him of the noise in the shelter, the radiator, the faint clatter of spoons, the low hum of Catherine's voice. He found himself wondering how Sophie had slept. If she'd eaten breakfast, if she still had his coat. He put on a different one and grabbed his keys. Outside, the city air bit his face. The streets were lined with salt and slush. By the time he reached the south side, the sky had darkened again, clouds rolling in low and gray. St. Luke's shelter looked smaller in daylight, its brick walls weathered, the sign crooked, the paint on the doors peeling. But the smell of coffee and bread drifted warmly from inside. He stepped through the doors, his breath fogging. The noise of children laughing hit him immediately, a sound both joyful and fragile. Sophie was among them, sitting cross-legged on the floor with a crayon in hand, drawing a picture on the back of a church bulletin. When she looked up and saw him, her eyes widened. "You came back?" "I said I would," he replied. "You didn't say when." "Guess I'm late then." She grinned a little. Her front tooth was chipped, but her smile lit the dim room. Catherine appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, look who decided to visit," she said. "Mr. Sterling, I wasn't sure men like you ever keep their word." "I'm trying to change that." Catherine studied him for a beat, then nodded toward the table. "There's coffee. Sit. We don't bite." Robert joined her at the long wooden table. The smell of fresh cornbread filled the air. Catherine poured him a cup, her movements calm and deliberate. "You've been thinking," she said. "Yes." "About her mama? About everything?" Catherine leaned back, her gaze steady. "Then maybe you're starting to see." "See what?" he asked. "That poverty isn't a wound people choose. It's a bruise someone else leaves." Her words sank into him, heavy and true. He looked toward Sophie again. She had moved to the window now, pressing her drawing against the light. It showed two stick figures holding hands under a street lamp. Between them, a red heart floated. "That's you," she told him when he walked over. The man with the warm coat. His throat tightened. He knelt beside her, studying the picture. "You made me look taller." "You are," she said simply. "Only when I'm standing next to someone brave." She giggled softly, returning to her coloring. Robert turned back toward Catherine, his voice low. "I want to help the shelter. The kids. Whatever you need." Catherine tilted her head. "That's a start, but help isn't money, Mr. Sterling. It's showing up again and again." "Then I'll show up." "We'll see," she said. But there was kindness behind the challenge. When Robert left that afternoon, the air outside was brittle and gray, but inside him, something small and bright was stirring. For the first time in years, the noise of the city didn't sound like chaos. It sounded like breathing. The following morning broke with a brittle chill. Sunlight filtered through thin clouds that hung low over the city. Robert woke early, his mind restless. The penthouse around him gleamed with precision. Polished marble floors, silent walls, art that matched the furniture more than it moved the heart. He showered, dressed, and paused in front of the mirror. The reflection staring back at him looked polished, successful, and empty. For years, he'd lived by the rhythm of business schedules, stock prices, and efficiency reports. Yet after 2 nights at the shelter, Those things felt as hollow as the wind whistling through the glass tower he called home. By 7, he was on the road again, a thermos of coffee beside him, the city still yawning awake. He stopped at a small bakery near 47th and Main, a modest corner shop that smelled of sugar and butter. The woman behind the counter, a middle-aged lady with weary eyes, greeted him with a polite nod. "Morning, sir. What can I get you?" "2 hot chocolates and 3 of those muffins." "Blueberry or bran?" "Blueberry," he said after a pause. "For a little girl?" She smiled softly as if she understood more than he'd said. "Got just the thing." By the time Robert reached St. Luke's shelter, the first rays of sunlight had broken through, scattering pale light across the old brick walls. He stepped inside, greeted by the warm murmur of breakfast. Children sat at folding tables, eating oatmeal and toast. Catherine stood by the counter, sleeves rolled up, pouring juice into plastic cups. She looked up when he entered. "Mr. Sterling," she said with a knowing smile. "Back so soon?" "I brought breakfast," he replied, holding up the bag. "We've got oatmeal." "Chocolate muffins," he said, "a peace offering." "Ah," Catherine chuckled. "Then you're already learning that charity is easier when it smells like cocoa." She gestured for him to come in. Sophie was at the far table, her hair tied in 2 uneven pigtails, talking quietly to a boy half her size. She looked up, spotted Robert, and waved. "Mr. Robert." Her voice was small but bright. He walked over, setting the bag down. "Morning, Sophie." "You came back again," she said, eyes wide with a kind of wonder that made his chest ache. "You didn't say you would." "I'm getting better at surprises," he said. She grinned. "Did you bring cake?" "Something close," he said, unwrapping the muffins. "Chocolate." "Mama liked chocolate," Sophie said quietly. "She said it makes you remember good days." "Then we'll remember," he said, handing her one. Sophie tore it in half before eating. She placed the other half neatly beside her napkin. "For Mama," she said matter-of-factly. Robert watched in silence. Even in her small rituals, the girl carried grace. Catherine approached, drying her hands. "You've got good timing," she said. "We were just about to do morning prayers." "Prayers?" "We thank God for another day." "I haven't done that in a while," he admitted. Catherine smiled faintly. "Doesn't matter. He's patient." The children folded their hands, heads bowed. Catherine's voice filled the room, steady, low, like an old hymn. "For warmth, for bread, for one more sunrise, we give thanks. For strangers who remember kindness, we give thanks." Her gaze flickered toward Robert. When she finished, the room was quiet, except for the sound of spoons against bowls. He lingered beside Sophie as she ate. "What do you do here all day?" he asked. "Sometimes help Miss Catherine," she said. "Sometimes draw." "In school?" She hesitated. "They said I can go when I have a house again." Robert nodded slowly. He glanced at Catherine. "Does the city not—" "The city," Catherine interrupted, "has forms and waiting lists and rules that forget children get hungry while papers shuffle. So nothing happens until someone makes noise." Her eyes met his. "You good at making noise, Mr. Sterling?" He gave a humorless laugh. "In my world, noise makes enemies. Maybe it's time you had the right kind." He looked down, tracing the rim of his coffee cup. "I don't know where to start." "Start with breakfast," Catherine said, moving away. "Then start showing up." The rest of the morning passed in soft rhythms. The laughter of children, the scrape of chairs, the quiet clatter of dishes. Robert helped clear tables, fumbling with the routine but strangely content. Each small act steadied him, like rediscovering a forgotten language. When the room emptied, Sophie tugged his sleeve. "Want to see something?" she asked. He followed her down the hallway to a small playroom. The walls were lined with paper drawings, houses, hearts, stick figures under rainbows. She pointed at one taped near the window. It showed a cardboard box under a street lamp, a tiny girl inside. "That's me," Sophie said proudly. "And that's the light." "On the light?" "Miss Catherine says when people care, it makes light, even if it's cold." Robert stared at the picture, the simple brilliance of it cutting through him. "You draw beautifully," he said. "You can keep it," she offered, "but you have to promise to put it where you'll see it." "I promise. Not in your car," she added. "Somewhere real." He smiled. "Deal." By noon, he was back in his car, the drawing on the passenger seat. Snow had started again, faint and glittering. He didn't drive home. Instead, he headed toward the industrial district where his company's old warehouses stood. The streets grew lonelier as he went, lined with half-empty buildings, faded logos, and boarded windows. He parked outside Sterling Industries' West Haven Warehouse number 7. The gate was locked but rusted. He forced it open and stepped inside. The air smelled of dust and burnt oil. Empty pallets littered the floor. Somewhere, a draft whistled through a broken vent. It was hard to imagine the place once full of workers, voices, footsteps, life. He walked slowly down the central aisle, his footsteps echoing. Near a corner office, he found a cluster of old drawings taped to the wall. Crayon pictures, children, families, hope in color. His breath caught. In the corner lay a torn blanket, a child's shoe, a spoon, evidence of small lives hiding in his forgotten empire. He crouched down, running his hand along the cold concrete. For a moment he could almost hear them, laughter, then silence. He stood, heart heavy. His phone buzzed. Vance again. He ignored it. As he turned to leave, the wind outside picked up, slamming the warehouse door. The sound echoed like a gunshot, reverberating through the emptiness. He stood still, the truth pressing on him like the weight of the roof itself. His company hadn't just built logistics lines. It had built graves for the forgotten. He locked the gate behind him, the metal cold against his palm. On the drive back, Sophie's drawing lay beside him, the red heart beneath the street lamp, bright against the white paper. By the time he reached the city center, dusk had begun to fall. Lights flickered on across the skyline. Somewhere in those lights, he thought, people were still waiting to be seen. The city lights shimmered like a river of glass beneath the twilight sky. Robert drove in silence, the hum of the engine blending with his thoughts. Every image of that abandoned warehouse clung to him. The cold concrete, the crayon drawings on the wall, the small shoe half buried in dust. They weren't just remnants of the poor. They were relics of his own neglect. When he finally pulled into the parking garage of his office building, the motion sensors flickered on, bathing the concrete in sterile white light. He sat in the car for several minutes, staring at the reflection of his hands on the steering wheel. The skin on his knuckles was cracked from the cold. He looked less like a CEO and more like a man who'd forgotten why he ever wanted power. Inside the building was hushed except for the low whir of the elevators. The security guard nodded politely. "Evening, Mr. Sterling." "Evening, Richard." His voice sounded distant to his own ears. He rode the elevator to the 24th floor. The glass walls of his office looked down on the skyline, miles of light, the illusion of order. On his desk waited a stack of reports, contracts neatly aligned, and his laptop blinking with new messages. He ignored them all and instead pulled out the small, folded drawing Sophie had given him. He laid it flat on the desk, the red heart bright under the soft light. For a long time, he stared at it. The child's handwriting wobbled, but the meaning was clear. "When people care, it makes light," he whispered to the empty room. "Then maybe it's time to turn the lights on." He opened his laptop and accessed the internal database again. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before typing. West Haven District terminated employees, 2024, 2025. Dozens of names appeared. Each line told a story that looked sterile on paper, but alive in his conscience. People fired to optimize costs, single parents, veterans, people who had nowhere else to go. And among them, Jennifer Wilson. He clicked on her record again, then on the archive notes from the financial division. There it was, approved by E. Vance. Automation phase schedule moved ahead per board directive. He remembered that meeting. Edward Vance had insisted the layoffs would save the company $6 million in operational costs. "The machines don't strike, don't sleep, and don't get sick," Vance had said, smiling as if it were a clever joke. Robert had nodded then. He hadn't known what those numbers cost in real lives. Now he did. He searched further and found an old email thread from Jennifer. Request, unpaid medical leave for treatment. Reason, stage 3 lymphoma. The reply, request denied due to workforce reduction policy. Robert's stomach turned. He leaned back, pressing a hand against his face. The air in the room felt thinner, sharper. He could almost hear Catherine's voice again. "Start showing up." His chest tightened. For the first time in years, Robert Sterling felt ashamed. A soft knock startled him. He looked up. Edward Vance stood at the door, immaculate as always in a dark tailored suit. "You're in early," Vance said, stepping inside. "Or late. Hard to tell with you lately." "What are you doing here, Ed?" "Damage control," Vance said smoothly. "You've been off schedule, missing meetings, visiting." He paused, his smile thin. "Unfavorable neighborhoods." Robert's voice hardened. "You've been watching me?" "Monitoring," Vance corrected. "You're the public face of Sterling Industries. If our investors sense instability—" "Instability," Robert's tone rose. "You mean conscience?" Vance's smile didn't waver. "I mean emotion. That's not what they pay you for." "Maybe it's what I owe them," Vance sighed. "You're not thinking clearly. That child, whoever she is, has nothing to do with us." "Her mother worked for us," Robert said quietly, "and she died after we fired her." "Robert," Vance said, his tone suddenly colder, "we didn't fire her. We restructured. There's a difference, Waikio. Tell that to her daughter sleeping in a box." Silence filled the room. For a moment, even the city outside seemed to hold its breath. Vance's expression hardened. "You're letting sentiment cloud your judgment. These stories happen every day. You can't carry the world's poor on your back." "No," Robert said quietly. "Just the ones I helped bury." Vance's eyes narrowed. "Careful. You're talking like a man who wants to sink his own company." Robert stood. "Maybe it deserves to sink. And what about your shareholders, your employees who still have jobs, your reputation? Maybe they deserve the truth too." "Truth doesn't pay dividends," Vance said sharply. "Compassion doesn't balance budgets." "Then maybe we're keeping the wrong books." Vance laughed under his breath, though there was no humor in it. "You sound like a preacher, not a CEO. Maybe I met someone better at saving souls than I am at saving money." "You'll regret this," Vance said, straightening his tie. "We all build walls to keep the world out, Robert. Don't tear yours down unless you're ready for the flood." "Maybe that's exactly what needs to happen." Vance's gaze lingered on him for a moment before he turned and walked out. The sound of his shoes faded down the corridor. Robert stood alone, staring at the reflection of the city lights in the glass wall. For the first time, they looked like bars. He sat back down, reopened Jennifer's file, and began copying documents onto a flash drive. Emails, contracts, approval logs. If there was a reckoning coming, he would face it with truth in his hands. When the last file saved, he looked again at Sophie's drawing. He whispered, "Your mama's story isn't ending in silence." Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and unending, blanketing the city in fragile white. The streets below looked peaceful, almost holy. Robert knew better now. Peace, he thought, wasn't the absence of noise. It was the courage to make the right kind. Night had fallen again over Chicago, quiet and heavy. The streets glistened with fresh snow, streetlights reflecting off wet pavement like ripples of gold. Robert drove without direction, the heater humming low, the city's noise fading to a dull heartbeat. Every turn seemed to pull him closer to the past, to the corners of his company he had chosen not to see. By instinct more than plan, he found himself once again at the edge of the industrial district, where old warehouses slouched against the skyline like tired giants. The sign above one of them flickered weakly, "Sterling Industries, building tomorrow." The irony tasted bitter. He parked near the gate, stepping into the cold. The silence here was different. It wasn't peaceful. It was abandoned, the kind of silence that swallowed names and replaced them with dust. He pulled his coat tighter and walked through the gate. Snow crunched under his shoes. His breath fogged in the dark. The wind whistled through broken panels, carrying faint echoes of machinery long gone. The building loomed in front of him, its roof sagging, its windows boarded, its once blue logo faded to gray. The warehouse had been Jennifer Wilson's workplace. It was also, he suspected, where Sophie sometimes slept when the shelter overflowed. He found the side door unlocked. The hinges groaned as he pushed it open. The inside smelled of rust and wet cardboard. He switched on his phone's flashlight. The beam sliced through the dark, revealing rows of empty shelving, abandoned tools, and a scatter of old paperwork across the floor. Somewhere in the corner, a small metal barrel lay toppled over, blackened from fire. Next to it were scraps of blankets, candy wrappers, and a child's glove. She had been here, Sophie, or maybe others like her. He knelt, touching the torn fabric. It was still faintly warm. Someone had stayed recently. He moved deeper into the building. The silence was broken only by the steady drip of melted snow leaking from the roof. The beam of his flashlight landed on a far wall. There, between rusted filing cabinets, were drawings, small, colorful, trembling lines of crayon against gray concrete. Stick figures, a woman with curly hair holding a little girl's hand under a yellow sun. Beside them, a house. Beneath it, written in a child's hand, "Me and Mama." Robert's knees weakened. He reached out, fingertips brushing the wall. The crayon smudged under his touch, fragile like memory itself. "I'm sorry," he whispered to the empty air. The apology sounded too small, too late. He heard a sound behind him, a faint rustle, quick and nervous. He turned the light. A woman stood near a stack of old pallets, arms crossed against the cold. Her face was weathered, eyes sharp with suspicion. "You're trespassing," she said, voice steady despite the chill. "This place is closed." "I own it," Robert replied simply. The woman studied him a moment longer. Recognition flickered in her eyes. "Sterling," she said, "I thought you'd never come back here." "You know me?" "Margaret Lane. I was warehouse manager until the closure. 18 years with your company, until automation made us obsolete." Robert felt something twist in his chest. "Why are you here now?" "I come back sometimes," she said. "Check on the kids who shelter here. Make sure they don't freeze. Someone has to." Her accusation was quiet but unmistakable. "There are children living here?" he asked. "Not living, surviving." She gestured toward the drawings. "These walls hold more stories than your company archives ever will." "Tell me," Robert said. "Please." Margaret hesitated, then sighed. A cloud of breath hung between them. When the layoffs came, some couldn't find new jobs, couldn't pay rent, lost homes. Some brought their children here because it was familiar. At least the security guards looked the other way on cold nights. "Did you know Jennifer Wilson?" he asked. Margaret's face softened slightly. Everyone knew Jen, single mother, worked harder than anyone. When she got sick, she begged for leave. Her supervisor denied it. "Vance," Robert said, "the very same." Margaret nodded. "He came here after the layoffs, ordered us to clean out personal belongings. When we mentioned Jen's situation, he said the company wasn't a charity. 2 months later, she was gone. Her little girl disappeared into the system until she turned up at Catherine's shelter." "What else did Vance do?" Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You really want to know?" "He buried safety reports, ignored violations, pushed schedules that put workers at risk. When 3 men were injured by faulty equipment, he classified it as operator error to avoid OSHA investigations." Robert felt sick. "Why didn't anyone speak up?" "Some did, I did." Her laugh was bitter. "Got labeled difficult. Meanwhile, Vance got promoted." She studied his face. "Why are you asking now? Little late for corporate conscience, isn't it?" "Yes," Robert admitted, "but not too late for the truth." Margaret considered him. "There's a storage room upstairs. Old safety reports, maintenance logs, complaints. Vance ordered them shredded, but I hid the worst ones. Thought someday someone might care." "Show me." She led him up a metal staircase that groaned under their weight. The upper floor was colder, wind whistling through broken windows. Margaret moved to a wall panel and slid it aside, revealing a small cavity stuffed with folders. "Everything's here. Evidence of every corner cut, every warning ignored." Robert stared at the hidden archive. "Why keep this? Why take the risk?" "For Jen, for all of them." Margaret's voice had softened. "Some things matter more than a paycheck." Robert began examining the files, flashlight illuminating pages of ignored warnings, falsified reports, denied claims. Each document was a nail in the coffin of his ignorance. He pulled out his phone, photographing page after page. "Vance will bury this," Margaret warned. "Not if I move first." A sound from below startled them both. Heavy footsteps, multiple sets. "Someone's here," Margaret whispered. They crept to the railing. Below, three men moved through the warehouse. One held a flashlight, sweeping it across the walls. "Check upstairs," a familiar voice ordered. Vance. "How did he know?" Robert whispered. "You're not exactly subtle driving your luxury sedan to the south side. Someone probably called him." Robert quickly gathered the most damning documents, stuffing them inside his coat. "Is there another way out?" Margaret nodded. "Fire escape, back corner." They moved silently toward the far end of the catwalk. The metal fire door was rusted shut. Robert pushed hard, the hinges screaming in protest. Cold night air rushed in. They stepped onto the iron landing just as flashlight beams reached the top of the stairs. "Go," Margaret urged. "I know my way around. I'll meet you tomorrow at Catherine's shelter." "You're sure? I've been waiting years for someone to listen." "Don't waste it." Robert descended the fire escape, ice cracking under his feet. When he reached the ground, he looked up. Margaret had disappeared back inside. He circled around to the front of the building, keeping to the shadows. Through a broken window, he could see Vance speaking angrily to the men with him, gesturing toward the empty document cache. Robert slipped back to his car, started the engine quietly, and pulled away without headlights. Only when he was several blocks away did he breathe normally again. In his rear-view mirror, the warehouse receded into darkness, but the weight of the documents inside his coat pressed against his chest, undeniable as a heartbeat. The next morning dawned gray and restless. Robert sat in his study, documents spread across his desk, a digital trail of corporate neglect taking shape on his computer. Each piece connected Vance more directly to decisions that had destroyed lives. His doorbell rang. The security screen showed a small boy, perhaps 8 years old, shivering on his doorstep. Robert opened the door. "Mr. Sterling?" the boy asked, teeth chattering. "Yes." "Miss Margaret sent me, said to give you this." He thrust forward a USB drive. "She said she couldn't come herself. Men are watching the shelter." Robert took the drive. "What's your name?" "Michael. I stay at the warehouse sometimes." "Come inside, it's freezing." The boy hesitated. "Can't. Others are waiting. Miss Margaret said to tell you they're cleaning out the warehouse tonight. Men with trucks." "Cleaning out? What do you mean?" "The men talk about burning, making it look like an accident." Michael's eyes were wide. "They don't know some of us still sleeping there." Robert felt his blood run cold. "Tonight?" The boy nodded. "When it gets dark. Miss Margaret said you'd help." "I will. Go back to the shelter. Tell Catherine I'm coming." Michael turned to leave, then paused. Miss Margaret said one more thing. She said, "Tell Sterling fire spreads fast." The boy ran down the steps, disappearing into the morning fog. Robert closed the door, his mind racing. He plugged in the USB drive. It contained employment records, emails between Vance and contractors, plans for warehouse cleanup operations. One file made his heart stop. A proposed schedule for accelerated asset liquidation, with tonight's date next to Warehouse 7. Authorization signature, Edward Vance. Robert grabbed his phone and called Catherine. "We have a problem," he said when she answered. "Vance is planning something at the warehouse tonight. Kids could be in danger." "Margaret already told me," Catherine replied. "She's trying to find everyone who might be staying there. But these children are scattered, Robert. Some don't trust adults enough to listen." "Call the police." "With what evidence? They won't act on homeless children's warnings. We've tried before." "I have documents." "Then bring them. Now." Catherine's voice was urgent. "And Robert, hurry." He gathered everything and drove through morning traffic to the shelter. Catherine met him at the door, her face tight with worry. Margaret's inside. She had to hide. Vance's men came looking for her. The shelter was unusually quiet. In the back office, Margaret sat with a cup of untouched coffee. Her face was pale. "You got my message," she said when Robert entered. "Yes, Michael found me." "Good boy, smart." She pushed a folder across the table. "Maintenance schedules. The warehouse electrical system was condemned 3 years ago. Exposed wiring everywhere. Perfect for a tragic accident." Robert examined the papers. "Vance is planning to destroy evidence." "And anyone who might be inside," Catherine added. "We need to get those children out." "How many?" Robert asked. "We're not sure," Margaret said. "Maybe 6 or 7 who use it regularly, plus others who might come for the night." We need to go there now. They won't leave until dark, Catherine warned. These kids are like shadows. They're invisible because they choose to be. Then I'll wait, Robert said. I'll stay until every last one is out. A small voice came from the doorway. I know where they hide. They turned. Sophie stood there clutching her worn bear. Sophie, Catherine said gently, you should be with the others. I can help. Her voice was small but determined. I know the secret places. They'll listen to me. It's too dangerous, Robert began. I'm not scared, Sophie said. Mama said being brave means doing important things even when you're scared. Robert looked at Catherine, who nodded slowly. She knows that place better than we do. She stays with me, Robert said firmly, no matter what. We'll all go, Margaret decided. I know the building. Catherine knows the children. You know what's at stake. They spent the next hours preparing. Catherine gathered blankets and food for the children they might find. Margaret drew maps of the warehouse, marking exits and hiding spots. Robert called Martin Graves, his attorney, explaining the situation and forwarding copies of all documents. If anything happens, he told Martin, make sure the truth comes out. You're taking a hell of a risk, Martin warned. Vance has powerful friends, and I have a conscience that's finally woken up. By late afternoon, they were ready. The plan was simple. Enter the warehouse before Vance's men arrived, find the children, get everyone out safely, then contact authorities with their evidence. As they prepared to leave, Sophie tugged at Robert's sleeve. Will you carry me if I get tired? He knelt beside her. I'll carry you the whole way if you need me to. She smiled, revealing her chipped front tooth. I knew you'd come back for us. Her simple faith struck him like a physical blow. In her eyes, he wasn't a CEO or a billionaire. He was simply the man who hadn't walked away. Let's go, he said, taking her small hand in his. The warehouse loomed dark against the twilight sky when they arrived. Robert parked several blocks away, out of sight. They approached on foot, Margaret leading through a hole in the perimeter fence. Sophie walked between Robert and Catherine, her steps sure despite the gathering darkness. There, Margaret whispered, pointing to a rusted door. Service entrance. The children use it because the lock is broken. They slipped inside. The interior was pitch black now, colder than outside. Robert switched on a small flashlight, keeping the beam low. Sophie pressed against his side. Where would they be? He whispered to her. Upper floor, she answered, where it's warmer, by the vents. Margaret nodded. The heating system still runs minimally. The northeast corner catches the output. They moved silently through the cavernous space, past abandoned machinery that cast monstrous shadows. Sophie guided them to a narrow staircase hidden behind old shipping crates. Up there, she whispered. The stairs creaked beneath their weight. At the top, Robert could hear soft movements, whispers. Hello, Catherine called gently. We've come to help. There's danger tonight. Silence. Then a small voice. Sophie? It's me, Sophie answered. And friends. The bad men are coming to burn the building. We have to go. Slowly, shapes emerged from the shadows. Children. 5 of them, ages ranging from maybe 6 to 13. Their eyes reflected the flashlight beam like nocturnal animals. We know you, an older boy said to Margaret. You bring blankets sometimes. Yes, Margaret said. And tonight I'm bringing safety. We need to leave now. Where will we go? A small girl asked. St. Luke's, Catherine answered. Warm beds, hot food. For how long? The older boy challenged. As long as you need, Robert said firmly. The children whispered among themselves. Finally, the older boy nodded. There are 2 more, hiding in the old cooling room. They're scared of adults. Show us, Robert urged. The boy led them deeper into the darkness to a sealed metal door. In there, I'll go first. They know me. He slipped inside. Minutes passed. Robert checked his watch nervously. Almost 7. If Vance planned to move at dark, they had perhaps 30 minutes. The door opened. The boy emerged with 2 smaller children, a boy and a girl, perhaps 7 years old. Everyone's here now, he said. We can go. They had just started back toward the stairs when headlights swept across the high windows. Car doors slammed outside. They're early, Margaret hissed. Robert moved to the window. 3 vehicles had parked at the loading dock. Men were unloading equipment. One carried what looked like gas cans. We need to move, he urged. Now. They herded the children toward the stairs, moving as quickly and quietly as possible. Sophie clung to Robert's hand, her fingers cold but steady. They had just reached the main floor when voices echoed from the loading entrance. "Check the circuit panel first," a voice ordered. "Make sure it looks right." "This way," Margaret whispered, leading them toward the service door. They moved in a tight group, adults surrounding children. Just as they reached the door, bright flashlight beams cut through the darkness behind them. "Hey!" a man shouted. "Who's there?" "Run!" Robert commanded. They burst through the door into the cold night. Behind them, shouts echoed. The children scattered instinctively, knowing the terrain. Catherine called out, "Meet at the corner! The blue car!" Robert lifted Sophie into his arms and ran. Margaret herded the other children ahead of them. They had nearly reached the fence when a figure stepped into their path. Edward Vance stood there, his expensive coat incongruous against the industrial wasteland. "Robert," he said, voice like ice. "What a surprise." "Move, Ed. It's over." Vance smiled thinly. "I don't think so. You're trespassing on company property. About to be condemned, I might add. With children inside? That's attempted murder." "Children? I see no children. Only vagrants. Regrettable, if any, are still inside when the faulty wiring finally shorts out." Behind them, there was a crash. Orange light flickered from inside the warehouse. Smoke began to curl from broken windows. "They've started the fire," Margaret gasped. Vance's smile never wavered. "Unfortunate timing. You should leave, Robert, before things get complicated." "They already are," Robert said, shifting Sophie to his hip. "I have your emails, Ed, the maintenance reports, everything. It's all ready with my attorney." For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Vance's face. "And now you're here," Robert continued. "Perfect timing to explain to the police why you're setting fire to a building with witnesses present." In the distance, sirens wailed. Vance's expression hardened. "This isn't over," he spat. "Yes, it is," Robert replied. "It was over the moment you decided profits mattered more than people." Vance turned and disappeared into the shadows. Robert carried Sophie to the fence, passing her through to Margaret on the other side. As he climbed through, he heard shouts from inside the warehouse. Men ran from the building as flames began to consume the old wooden structure. They gathered the children at Robert's car. All were accounted for, shivering but safe. As police and fire trucks arrived, the warehouse blazed against the night sky, a funeral pyre for memories and evidence alike. A police detective approached their group, notepad in hand. "Someone want to explain what's happening here?" Robert stepped forward. "My name is Robert Sterling. I own this property, and I believe I've just witnessed arson authorized by my company's executive vice president." The detective's eyebrows rose. "That's a serious accusation." "I have evidence," Robert said, passing over his flash drive. "Everything's here, including the fact that my company knew homeless children sometimes sheltered in this building." The detective studied him. "Why come forward now, Mr. Sterling?" Robert felt Sophie's small hand slip into his. He looked down at her, then back at the detective. "Because there are moments in life when you have to decide who you really are," he said quietly. "This is mine." As firefighters battled the blaze, Robert watched his past burning to ash. Yet somehow, with Sophie's hand in his, he felt not loss, but liberation. The detective, who introduced himself as Nate Sullivan, spent the next hour questioning everyone. He was particularly gentle with the children, earning Sophie's trust with his quiet respect. When he pulled Robert aside, his face was grave. "Security camera from the building across the street," he said, showing Robert his phone. The grainy image showed Vance entering the warehouse the previous evening. "That's not all," Sullivan continued. "One of the men we apprehended has already flipped. Says Vance paid him through a shell company called Crown and Anchor Construction. Paid extra for total clearance, whatever that means." "It means no witnesses," Robert said grimly. "No evidence," Sullivan nodded. "We'll bring Vance in tonight. Meanwhile, you and these kids should get somewhere safe. People like Vance have friends in high places." Robert looked at the group huddled near his car, 7 children whose existence had been an inconvenience to be erased. Catherine and Margaret, who had cared when no one else would, and Sophie, whose simple act of sharing a chocolate cake had somehow saved him from himself. "We know somewhere," he said. An hour later, they were all at St. Luke's shelter. The children had been fed, bathed, and settled into warm beds. Catherine had called in volunteers to help with the sudden influx. Margaret sat with Robert in the small office, both nursing cups of coffee grown cold. "What now?" she asked. "Now I talk to my attorney," he said. "Prepare for the fight of my life. Vance won't go quietly. Neither will I." Robert stared into his cup. "For too long, I've been silent. Let others make decisions I should have questioned. People suffered for my comfort. You can't undo the past." "No, but I can face it and make sure it never happens again." The door creaked open. Sophie stood there in borrowed pajamas, her hair damp from a shower. "Can't sleep?" Robert asked. She shook her head. "Are the bad men coming back?" "No," he said firmly. "They can't hurt you anymore. I promise by now." She climbed onto his lap, small and warm against his chest. "I knew you were different," she murmured. "How?" "Your eyes look sad, like you lost something too." Robert felt his throat tighten. This child who had lost everything was comforting him. "What happens tomorrow?" Margaret asked softly. Robert looked down at Sophie, already drifting to sleep against him, and then up at Margaret. "Tomorrow," he said, "we start building something better." The morning after the warehouse fire dawned cold and brilliant, sunlight refracting through ice crystals that hung in the air like suspended diamonds. Chicago awakened to news of the blaze, another industrial accident in a forgotten district. But inside St. Luke's shelter, Robert Sterling knew the truth burned hotter than any flame. He had slept in a chair, Sophie curled against his chest. His suit was wrinkled, his face stubbled with silver, the mask of corporate perfection long discarded. When his phone vibrated, he answered quickly to avoid waking her. "Sterling." His voice was rough from smoke and exhaustion. "Robert, it's Martin. Vance was arrested last night. Detective Sullivan found the connection to Crown and Anchor Construction. The contractor confessed everything." Robert felt something unclench inside his chest. "And the evidence?" "You were smart to send me copies. The originals may have burned, but we have enough digital records to build a case. The press is already circling. Your name is being mentioned." Sophie stirred against him. Her eyes fluttered open, momentarily confused, then focused on his face. "We need to talk strategy," Martin continued. "Damage control." Robert watched Sophie slide from his lap and pad across to where Catherine was serving breakfast to the other children. "No," he said firmly. "No damage control, no strategy, just the truth. Robert, be reasonable. Sterling Industries will take a massive hit if this goes public. Stock prices, consumer confidence. Children almost died, Martin. Jennifer Wilson did die. You didn't know. That's the problem. I didn't know because I chose not to know." Silence hummed on the line. Finally, Martin sighed. "What do you want to do?" Robert watched Sophie carefully break a muffin in half, setting one portion aside in what he now recognized as her ritual for her mother. The simple grace of the gesture made his throat tighten. "I want a press conference. Today, at City Hall." "Robert, set it up, Martin." He ended the call and crossed to the breakfast table. Catherine handed him a coffee, her eyes questioning. "Vance was arrested," he told her, "but this is just beginning." She nodded. "And what will Sterling Industries do now? What will you do?" "Tell the truth, all of it." "That's a rare commodity in your world." "It shouldn't be." She studied him, then smiled faintly. "There's a clean shirt in the donation box. Blue Oxford, might fit you." He glanced down at his smoke-stained clothes. "Thank you." "When you face the cameras," she added, "remember what brought you here. Not guilt. Grace." The morning blurred into preparations. Martin called with details of the hastily arranged press conference. Detective Sullivan arrived to take statements from Margaret and the children. News vans began gathering outside the shelter, reporters hoping for a glimpse of the billionaire CEO who had spent the night with homeless children. Robert kept Sophie close. She seemed to sense the gravity of the day, her usual chatter subdued. When it was time to leave for City Hall, she tugged at his sleeve. "Can I come?" she asked. Robert hesitated. "It might be scary. Lots of cameras, lots of people." "I'm not scared with you," she said simply. Catherine approached, overhearing. "I think she should go. People need to see who this is really about." Robert nodded slowly. "Okay, but you stay right with me. Always, Sophie promised. They drove through streets now busy with midday traffic. Sophie pressed her face to the window, watching the city flow past. Robert rehearsed what he would say, then abandoned the mental script. The truth needed no rehearsal. City Hall loomed ahead, its stone facade austere against the winter sky. News vans lined the street, reporters clustered on the steps like ravens. Martin waited at the entrance, his face tight with professional concern. "You're sure about this?" he asked as Robert approached, Sophie's hand in his. "I've never been more sure of anything." The press room was packed. Cameras clicked in word as Robert entered with Sophie. He lifted her onto a chair beside the podium so she wouldn't be lost in the crowd. Catherine and Margaret slipped into seats at the back. Detective Sullivan stood by the door, arms crossed, watching. Martin stepped to the microphone. "Mr. Sterling has a statement. He won't be taking questions afterward." Then Robert stood before the flashing lights, the hungry eyes, the poised pens. He took a deep breath. Sophie gave him a small smile of encouragement. "Good morning," he began, his voice steady. "My name is Robert Sterling. Until last week, I served as CEO of Sterling Industries. I'm here today not as an executive, not as a businessman, but as the man responsible for what burned in West Haven." The room fell silent, every eye fixed on him, every pen stilled. "The fire you saw last night didn't begin in the flames. It began the day I let profit mean more than people, the day I signed the order to close that warehouse. I condemned families like Jennifer Wilson's to the streets." He glanced at Sophie. "Jennifer was an employee at that site. She was sick. She asked for medical leave. We denied it. She died 2 months later. Her daughter Sophie is 6 years old. She's alive, but she was sleeping in a cardboard box when I found her." Flashbulbs erupted. Someone gasped. Robert pressed on, his voice steady. "That warehouse wasn't just a building. It was a grave for everything this company lost when it forgot compassion. And when I started to uncover what happened, when I went back there, I found that the fire wasn't an accident." The room grew tense. Reporters leaned forward. Accelerant was used, industrial fuel. Someone wanted to erase the records tied to that site, and I have reason to believe it was ordered by members of my own leadership team, men who wanted the truth buried under ash. A reporter shouted, "Mr. Sterling, are you accusing your former vice president, Edward Vance?" Robert met her gaze. "I'm not accusing anyone," he said. "I'm confessing." The room exploded, voices overlapping, cameras flashing, chaos building like a wave. He raised a hand for silence. "Every document related to West Haven, emails, contracts, personnel files, will be turned over to investigators. I'm prepared to testify under oath. I will not seek protection or privilege, and I will dedicate every remaining dollar I have to rebuilding what we destroyed." A voice from the back shouted, "Are you resigning from the board?" "I already have," Robert said simply, "because a company without conscience doesn't deserve a future. But maybe its people do." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "I can't undo what's been done, but I can stop pretending I don't see the smoke." He stepped away from the microphone. Reporters surged forward, shouting questions, but he didn't answer any of them. He took Sophie's hand and walked out through the side door, the echo of camera shutters chasing them down the hall like applause from ghosts. Outside, snow was falling again, soft and slow. Sophie looked up at him, her expression solemn. "Did you tell them about Mama?" she asked. "I did," he said, kneeling to her level. "I told them she mattered." Sophie nodded, satisfied. She would like that. She always said being forgotten is worse than being gone. Robert felt his eyes burn. "You have her wisdom," he whispered. She smiled faintly. "And her nose." That's what she said. The days that followed passed in a blur of legal depositions, news reports, and corporate turmoil. Sterling Industries stock plummeted. Board members resigned. Investors fled. Class action lawsuits emerged from former employees. Through it all, Robert remained at St. Luke's, working from a makeshift office in Catherine's study, determined to be present for Sophie and the other children. Detective Sullivan became a regular visitor, bringing updates on the investigation. One evening, a week after the fire, he arrived with a thick folder. "Thought you'd want to see this," he said, spreading photographs across the desk. Security footage from multiple sites. Vance at the warehouse the night before the fire. Meetings with Crown and Anchor Construction. Phone records showing calls to Daniel Trask, the contractor we arrested. Robert studied the evidence. Will it be enough? More than enough. Vance is facing multiple charges: arson, criminal negligence, obstruction, and we're just getting started. Sullivan tapped another document. The district attorney wants you to testify. I'll tell them everything I know. Sullivan's gaze softened. The girl, Sophie. What happens to her? Robert looked through the doorway to where Sophie sat drawing with the other children. I'm working on that. Catherine's helping me navigate the system. Foster care eventually. Maybe, he hesitated, maybe something more permanent. Sullivan nodded. She's lucky she found you. I'm the lucky one, Robert said quietly. That night, after the children were asleep, Robert sat with Catherine and Margaret in the small kitchen. Steam rose from mugs of tea, curling in the quiet air. The foundation paperwork is almost complete, Robert said. Safe Haven Foundation, dedicated to providing shelter and support for children affected by corporate displacement. Quite a mission statement, Margaret observed. It's just the beginning. Robert spread architectural drawings across the table. I found a property, the old Central Station, abandoned for years, but the structure is sound. Catherine studied the plans. Ambitious. It needs to be. This isn't charity. It's restitution. Margaret traced the outline of the building with her finger. What about Sterling Industries? The board has appointed an interim CEO. I've retained enough voting shares to push through policy changes. No more layoffs without guaranteed transitions. Full medical benefits for all employees, including temporary workers, and a complete review of all facilities for safety compliance. They agreed to all that? Catherine asked, surprised. After what happened, they couldn't afford not to. Robert sipped his tea. Public opinion is a powerful motivator. So is the threat of further litigation. And Vance? Margaret asked. His preliminary hearing is next week. His lawyers are already floating a defense that he was acting in the company's best interest. Catherine shook her head. Some things can't be justified by a bottom line. I'm learning that, Robert said softly. The conversation drifted into quiet planning. When Catherine and Margaret retired for the night, Robert remained at the table, reviewing documents, making notes. A small sound made him look up. Sophie stood in the doorway, clutching her worn bear. Can't sleep? He asked. She shook her head. Bad dream. He opened his arms. She climbed onto his lap, tucking her head beneath his chin. Want to talk about it? The fire came back, she whispered, but it didn't hurt. It just made everything too bright. He stroked her hair. Sometimes light looks scary at first. Like truth, she said, remembering his words from days ago. He smiled. Exactly like that. She fingered the architectural drawings. What are these, Brady? A new place for children who need homes. She studied the images with surprising intensity. It should be yellow, she declared. Yellow is the color of remembering. Then yellow it will be, he promised. She yawned, her small body growing heavy against him. Will you be there too? Every day, he said. Good, she murmured, drifting toward sleep. 'Cause you need a home too. Her words struck him deeply. For all his wealth, all his properties, he had never truly had a home, a place where his soul rested. Perhaps, he thought as Sophie's breathing deepened into sleep, he was finally building one. Spring crept hesitantly into Chicago, snow reluctantly surrendering to pale green shoots and tentative birdsong. The city shed its winter coat, revealing the bones of renewal beneath. The former Central Station hummed with activity. Construction crews moved through the vast space, transforming abandoned platforms into dormitories, ticket offices into classrooms, and the grand concourse into a communal living area. The facade gleamed with fresh paint, yellow as Sophie had insisted, warm as remembered sunlight. Robert moved among the workers, hard hat replacing his executive suit, hands calloused from unexpected labor. Each morning he met with architects and contractors. Each afternoon he returned to St. Luke's, where Sophie waited with new drawings for their house, as she called it. On a warm April morning, Catherine found him inspecting the newly installed windows in what would become the dining hall. You've missed 3 calls from the district attorney, she said without preamble. He turned, wiping dust from his hands. The trial date's been moved up. Next week. Are you ready? Does anyone get ready to dismantle their own legacy? She smiled faintly. You're building a better one. I hope so. He gestured to the space around them. Phase 1 should be complete in a month. 25 beds, full kitchen, medical office. Just the beginning. In Sterling Industries? The shareholders' meeting is tomorrow. I'm presenting the restructuring plan. They won't like it. They'll like lawsuits less. He looked out the window where the city skyline rose in the distance. For too long, we've operated as if we were separate from the community. Islands of profit in a sea of someone else's problems. That ends now. Catherine studied him. You're different. I'm trying to be. Sophie asks about you when you're not there, she said casually. Wonders when you're coming home. The word caught in his chest. Home, not house, not shelter, home. I've filed the initial paperwork, he said quietly, for guardianship, possibly adoption eventually, if she wants. She wants, Catherine said simply. The shareholders' meeting the next day was as contentious as expected. Robert stood before former colleagues and investors, many now openly hostile, and outlined his vision for a company rebuilt on principles of community responsibility. The debate was heated, the vote closed, but in the end, the shadow of public scrutiny and Robert's still significant ownership stake carried the day. As he left the corporate tower, possibly for the last time, he felt lighter. The building that had once been the center of his world now seemed like a relic from another life, impressive but hollow. He drove directly to the courthouse, where Martin Graves waited with final preparations for Vance's trial. The prosecution had built a formidable case, but Vance had secured high-powered defense attorneys who would attack Robert's credibility relentlessly. They'll paint you as a man having a breakdown, Martin warned, a CEO gone rogue, destroying his own company out of misplaced guilt. They'll question your mental stability, your motives, everything. Let them, Robert said. The truth doesn't need defense, it just needs witnesses. The morning of the trial dawned clear and sharp, sunlight glinting off the courthouse columns like spears. Journalists crowded the steps, cameras tracking Robert as he ascended. Inside, the courtroom hummed with subdued energy. Vance sat at the defense table, immaculate in a navy suit, his expression carved from stone. Their eyes met briefly. Vance looked away first. The proceedings began with clinical precision, opening statements, exhibits entered into evidence, technical testimony about accelerants and burn patterns. Robert sat in the gallery, watching justice unfold in slow, methodical movements. When his name was finally called, he walked to the witness stand, took the oath, and faced the courtroom. The prosecutor approached, her manner brisk but respectful. Mr. Sterling, you built one of the largest logistics companies in the country. Why come forward now? He took a deep breath. Because I finally saw who got left behind, he said, and once you see them, you can't look away. The courtroom fell silent. For the next hour, Robert detailed the events leading to the warehouse fire, his discovery of Sophie, the revelation about her mother, his investigations into Vance's decisions, the evidence of systematic negligence. Each word felt like stepping further from his old life, but closer to something authentic. When Vance's attorney rose for cross-examination, his smile was razor-thin. Mr. Sterling, isn't it true that you yourself approved the automation initiative that led to Jennifer Wilson's termination? Yes. And isn't it true that until you happened to encounter her daughter, you never once questioned these business decisions? That's correct. So your alleged concern for workers' welfare is extremely recent, isn't it? Robert met the attorney's gaze. When you recognize you've been blind, you don't celebrate how long you couldn't see. You start looking harder. The attorney's smile faltered. He shifted tactics, questioning Robert's mental state, his business judgment, his potential ulterior motives. But with each barbed question, Robert responded with simple truth, neither defending his past actions nor exaggerating his recent awakening. When the prosecutor rose for redirect, she asked only one question. Mr. Sterling, given what you know now, what would you have done differently? Robert paused. The courtroom waited. Everything, he said softly. I would have remembered that spreadsheets don't get sick, buildings don't go hungry, profit margins don't sleep in boxes. People do. I forgot that once. I won't again. As he stepped down, he passed Vance. The man who had once been his trusted colleague stared straight ahead, but a muscle in his jaw twitched, the only sign that he felt the foundation crumbling beneath him. The trial stretched over 3 weeks. Evidence mounted, witnesses testified. The prosecution built a meticulous case connecting Vance to the arson attempt and the broader pattern of negligence. Throughout, Robert attended every session, bearing witness to the unraveling of the corporate culture he had helped create. On the day of closing arguments, Sophie asked to attend. Catherine brought her, dressed in her best outfit, a blue dress donated to the shelter, carefully ironed. "Why do you want to be here?" Robert asked her as they sat in the gallery. "I want to see the end," she said with simple certainty. "Mama always said stories need proper endings." The jury deliberated for less than 5 hours. When they filed back in, their faces were solemn. The verdict was read in a clear, steady voice that filled the hushed courtroom. Guilty, on all counts. Vance showed no emotion as the judge sentenced him to 25 years without parole. Only when officers approached to take him into custody did he turn to look at Robert. His eyes filled with something beyond anger, a kind of bewildered incomprehension, as if he still couldn't understand how the rules he'd played by all his life had suddenly changed. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. Robert placed his hand gently on Sophie's shoulder, guiding her through the crowd. One journalist stepped directly into their path. "Mr. Sterling, what does this verdict mean for Sterling Industries?" Robert looked down at Sophie, then back at the reporter. "It means we remember who we build for." That evening, the Safe Haven Foundation held a small celebration at St. Luke's. Not for the verdict, there was no joy in Vance's downfall, but for the future taking shape before them. The children colored welcome signs for the new shelter. Volunteers prepared a special dinner. Catherine led a simple blessing, thanking God for second chances. As twilight softened into night, Robert found Sophie sitting on the church steps, looking up at the emerging stars. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, sitting beside her. "Is it over now?" she asked. "The trial is, but our work is just beginning." She nodded, her expression serious beyond her years. "Will we live in the yellow house soon?" His heart caught on the we. "Very soon, the first families move in next month." "And us? I've been meaning to talk to you about that." He turned to face her. "Sophie, would you like to stay with me? Not just at Safe Haven, but as part of my family?" She studied him, her blue eyes solemn. "Like a dad? If you want, or just as Robert, whatever feels right to you." She was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then, "Mama would like that. She always said families find each other, even when they get lost first." He felt tears prickle behind his eyes. "Your mama was very wise." "I know," Sophie said simply. She leaned against his arm. "Can we visit her sometimes? At the cemetery? As often as you want. And can I still keep her half of the muffin?" "Always." She smiled then, the first full, uncomplicated smile he'd seen from her. "Then yes, I want to be your family." Under the stars, with the sounds of the city humming around them, something broken in Robert Sterling finally mended. Summer bloomed across Chicago, dressing the city in vibrant green and the persistent energy of renewal. Safe Haven opened its doors in late May, yellow walls gleaming in the sunshine, windows reflecting new beginnings. The first 25 residents settled in, children from St. Luke's, from other shelters, from situations much like Sophie's. Each room was painted a different color, named after qualities rather than numbers: courage, hope, wisdom, joy. Sophie chose a blue room overlooking the garden, which she promptly filled with drawings and books. Robert moved into the director's apartment on the top floor, a modest space that felt more like home than his penthouse ever had. Each morning he woke to the sounds of children's voices and the smell of breakfast cooking in the communal kitchen. Each evening he sat with Sophie, reading stories or helping with the schoolwork she'd begun at the local elementary. News of Safe Haven spread. Donations poured in. Volunteers offered skills, time support. What had begun as one man's atonement was becoming a community's commitment. On a warm July afternoon, Clara Reynolds from the City Housing Department visited for an inspection. She walked the halls with Robert, noting the transformation from abandoned station to thriving shelter. You've done remarkable work here, she admitted, reviewing her clipboard. I was skeptical when you first proposed this, but, Robert prompted, but clearly I was wrong. She gestured to a classroom where children were engaged in art therapy. This is what recovery looks like. Not just for them, for the city. It's only the beginning, Robert said. We've secured two more properties. Harbor North opens next month, Harbor East by Christmas. Clara's eyebrows rose. Ambitious. Necessary, he corrected. The need is greater than one building can address. And Sterling Industries, I hear the new leadership is continuing your reforms. It's a process. Change comes slowly in corporate culture. But yes, they're maintaining the employee support programs, the community reinvestment initiatives. The board has even approved a healthcare fund for families affected by past layoffs. She made a final note on her form, then handed him an official certificate of occupancy. Congratulations, Mr. Sterling. Safe Haven is officially open for business. As Clara left, Sophie appeared in the doorway, her school backpack slung over one shoulder. Miss Catherine says we're having a party tonight to celebrate. That's right, to celebrate Safe Haven's official opening. She beamed. Can I show everyone my room? Of course, it's your home. The words settled between them, simple and profound. Home. Not a penthouse filled with expensive emptiness, but a place where souls connected, where wounds healed, where the future took root in the broken ground of the past. That evening, Safe Haven filled with people, volunteers, donors, children, neighbors. They gathered in the main hall where tables groaned with potluck offerings and a hand-painted banner declared, "Welcome home." Catherine led a blessing. Margaret raised a toast. Children performed songs they had rehearsed for weeks. In a quiet moment, Robert slipped away to his office. On the wall hung Sophie's first drawing, the two stick figures under the streetlight, the red heart floating between them. Beside it now hung dozens more, a tapestry of healing rendered in crayon and hope. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Detective Sullivan stood in the doorway. Quite a celebration, he said, stepping inside. Thought I'd stop by with news. Daniel Trask, the contractor who worked with Vance, gave us more names. The investigation is expanding. 3 more executives from Sterling Industries have been implicated in similar cover-ups at other facilities. Will there be more charges? Almost certainly. The DA is talking about a task force focused on corporate negligence cases. Sullivan's expression softened. None of this would have happened without you, Robert. Without Sophie, Robert corrected. She's the one who saw me when I was invisible to myself. Sullivan nodded toward the main hall where music and laughter spilled through the building. You've built something good here. We're building, Robert said. All of us, together. As Sullivan left, Sophie appeared, her face flushed from dancing. Everyone's looking for you. Miss Catherine's cutting the cake, he smiled. Lead the way. She took his hand, pulling him back to the celebration, to the community that had formed around a simple act of seeing those who had been invisible. Fall painted Chicago in amber and crimson, leaves spiraling down to carpet the city in ephemeral gold. Safe Haven grew and evolved, its rhythms as natural as the changing seasons. 43 children now called it home. The second facility, Harbor North, opened in September with 30 more beds. Construction on Harbor East proceeded ahead of schedule. Robert divided his time between administration, fundraising, and, most importantly, being present for Sophie. She had settled into 3rd grade at the local school, making friends, bringing home art projects and math papers covered in gold stars. The court had approved his guardianship petition. Adoption proceedings would begin after the new year. One crisp October morning, they visited the cemetery together. The headstone was simple. Jennifer Wilson, beloved mother. Sophie placed a small bouquet of yellow daisies at its base. Mama loved yellow, she explained as they stood hand in hand. She said it was the color of happiness, even on gray days. She sounds remarkable, Robert said. She was. Sophie arranged the flowers with careful precision. She would like what we're building. She always wanted to help people, but she got too sick. Then we'll help them for her. Sophie nodded solemnly. That's why I'm going to be a doctor when I grow up, to help sick moms. Robert felt his throat tighten. You'll be an amazing doctor. I know, she said with childish certainty. I already practiced with my stuffed animals. As they walked back to the car, Sophie's small hand in his, Robert reflected on the journey of the past year, from corporate towers to homeless shelters, from balance sheets to bedtime stories, from isolation to connection. The transformation of his external world had been remarkable. The divestment of wealth, the creation of safe haven, the corporate reforms. But the internal shift had been more profound. He had rediscovered something essential, something he hadn't even realized he'd lost. Winter returned to Chicago, softening the city's hard edges with crystalline beauty. Snow fell on the anniversary of the night Robert had found Sophie, a symmetry that felt significant. Safe Haven celebrated with a special dinner. Afterward, residents and staff gathered in the main hall, where a Christmas tree glowed with handmade ornaments. Children performed songs and recited poems. Parents who had been reunited with their children through Safe Haven's family support programs shared tearful testimonials. When the formal program ended, Catherine approached Robert with a small gift box. "From all of us," she said, "to mark the anniversary." Inside lay a simple silver key on a handcrafted keychain. Engraved on the metal was a single word: home. Robert looked up, eyes moist. "I don't deserve—" "Stop," Catherine interrupted gently. "It was never about deserving. It was about choosing. And you chose to see what others ignored." And later that evening, when the celebration had quieted and most residents had retired to their rooms, Robert sat in the small garden courtyard, watching snow accumulate on benches and bare tree branches. Sophie found him there, wrapped in her winter coat. "Miss Catherine said you might need company," she said, settling beside him on the bench. "She's very wise, Miss Catherine. Why are you sitting in the snow?" He smiled. "Just remembering, it was snowing the night we met." "I remember," she said. "You gave me your coat and cake. You gave half to your mother." "I still do," she said seriously. "Every day. Some things don't change." "And some things do," he murmured. She leaned against his arm. "Like us becoming a family." "Yes, like that." They sat in comfortable silence, watching snowflakes swirl in the golden light from the windows. Each flake unique, temporary, perfect in its moment, like the connections between people, between past and future, between loss and renewal. "Mr. Robert," Sophie said suddenly, using the name she still sometimes fell back to when serious, "are you happy now?" The question was so direct, so essential it caught him off guard. Was he happy? Not in the superficial way he might once have defined happiness, success, acquisition, achievement, but in a deeper sense, purpose, connection, meaning. Yes, he was. "I am," he said softly. "Are you?" She nodded. "Mama said happiness isn't about having everything. It's about sharing the important things." He put his arm around her small shoulders. "Your mother was right about that too." A year had passed since that night in the snow, a year of dismantling and rebuilding, of reckoning and renewal. The journey wasn't complete, perhaps it never would be. But sitting there with Sophie, watching snow transform the world into something pure and possible, Robert Sterling finally understood what had been missing in his life before. Not success, not wealth, not power, but this, the quiet miracle of being truly seen and the grace of seeing others in return. The snow continued to fall, each flake a perfect moment, each moment a gift. Sophie yawned, nestling closer. "Can we go inside now? It's getting cold." "Of course," he said, rising and taking her hand. "Let's go home." And together they walked back into the warmth, leaving footprints in the snow that would soon be covered. But the path they had created, from isolation to connection, from indifference to care, would remain, a testament to the journey that had begun on a winter night with two strangers and a piece of chocolate cake shared beneath the falling snow.